Darnell Nurse is an elite defenseman in the NHL. There, I said it. Let's talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, Darnell Nurse is an elite defenseman. And no, this isn't recency bias from his overtime winner against the San Jose Sharks. I dove into the analytics from Darnell Nurse this year specifically, and he is in a very, very elite company in a lot of different stat categories. We will talk about that in just a second. But also on today's episode, the Arizona Coyotes are here in town for a very late puck drop at Rogers Place. We are going to preview the matchup with some lineup notes. Also, an update on the Edmonton Oilers signing a player out of college. We will talk about that. And to wrap up today's episode, we are going with the ghost of Oilers past. And this ghost was initially drafted by the Oilers in 2011, was traded, then came back to play with his countryman in Leon Draisaitl, but this journeyman didn't last in Edmonton. There is your hint for it, but no, it's not who you think it is, I guess. You're probably going with the most recent one. Hey, you have the recency bias. Either way, that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Darnell Nurse is an elite defenseman. See, I went to art school, should have known Darnell Nurse is an elite defenseman in the NHL. 8 goals, 29 assists, 37 points so far this year, and everybody loves to talk about that $9.3 million. He's making so much money, this and that and the other thing. Listen, I know that Cale Makar signed that contract when he did, and everybody gets their panties in a knot, and it is what it is. The thing is that you're signing Darnell Nurse to that $9.3 million for a very good reason. First of all, it's keeping Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in town, because without actual people that they like in the lineup for the Edmonton Oilers, makes it very difficult to keep players like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Darnell Nurse to play in Edmonton. That is the first thing, but we'll get back to that in a second. Let's get to the analytics. As mentioned, Darnell Nurse, 71 games played, 8 goals, 29 assists, 37 points. He has been fantastic for the Edmonton Oilers. In parts. There's been also other parts where you can sit there and go, what the heck is Darnell Nurse doing? Completely understand that. I love the Athletics player cards. They give a fantastic visual as to where every single one of these players sit when it comes to what they actually do on the ice. On those player cards, they track the numbers of ice time, goals, assists, points, expected goals, offensive and defensive differentials, and that lovely GSVA, or the wins above replacement, or to basically shallow it down even more, how many wins you actually get your team each season. Darnell Nurse has unbelievable numbers in these categories. Then I'm going to get back to the market value, or talk to you about that $9.3 million. But let's talk about where Darnell Nurse sits in the NHL when it comes to these stats. His ice time, how much ice time he gets each night or averages each night, sits in the 94th percentile in the NHL amongst defensemen. He gets about 23.7 minutes per game and could get up to 23 or 24.3 by the end of the year. Although could also dip down with Matthias Ekholm's acquisition. That's another thing to also factor into that. His goals, he sits in the 77th percentile in NHL defensemen or amongst NHL defensemen with 8. He has the potential to get up to 9. Could you imagine if the Oilers got another player in a defenseman as well, getting over 10 goals? That would be huge for this team too. 85th percentile in assists and points, 29 assists so far this year with 37 points. Could get up to 43 points for him this year. This is where it gets very impressive for Darnell Nurse. Expected goals. So how much he helps the Edmonton Oilers produce on the ice to the point where he is expected to score a goal in any given game. He sits in the 91st percentile in the NHL in expected goals amongst NHL defensemen, with 8 right now, could get up to 10 in that number. Offensive differential sits at a 93 percentile, 13.7 in the offensive differential, and could get up to 15.3. That means the Edmonton Oilers are scoring more often when he's on the ice than when they concede, Then, the final stat that is the most mind-blowing to me, the GSVA, the wins above replacement, that how many games you win each season for your team. Darnell Nurse sits in the 89th percentile when it comes to the GSVA, winning the Edmonton Oilers already this year 2.1 games, and we saw one of those big metrics against the San Jose Sharks recently, and could get up to 2.4. That brings his market value up to an $8.6 million contract. Now you're sitting there and going, Brett, that is much different than that $9.3 million. Could you imagine what we could do with that $700,000? Yeah, sure. Sure. But you know where that $700,000 goes, or that $700,000 of value goes? That goes to the leadership of Darnell Nurse, the guy who has been in an Edmonton Oilers uniform since 2016, 2015, 2014 he was drafted, 2013 he was drafted, This is a guy who has been with the Edmonton Oilers for quite a while and was also at that tail end of the very, very bad Edmonton Oilers team. This is also a guy who is from the same area as Darnell, or as Connor McDavid, They are very close together. Leon Draisaitl as well has gotten just as close with them. This is a tight-knit group. These numbers equate to $8.6 million in value with what he does on the ice. You also have a team to keep together, so you can eventually, hopefully, sign Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid past this contract for them. But the only way you do that is surrounding them with players and people that they are comfortable with. And Darnell Nurse is one of those people. Would you rather lose Darnell Nurse right now, or because you think that his plus minus, which is also at, if I'm not mistaken off the top of my head, plus 20, not bad for a number one defenseman who sits on one of the worst defensive teams as well in the league, and then eventually lose Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, and we all know what ends up happening after that. Would you rather that $700,000 on a Liam O'Brien? On a Tyler Benson? Darnell Nurse is not only an elite defenseman, but he is the glue of the Edmonton Oilers, and alongside Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Zach Hyman as well, but he is an elite defenseman, and you need to put more respect on Darnell Nurse's name. Darnell Nurse will be on the top pairing for the Edmonton Oilers tonight as the Arizona Coyotes come into town for a very late puck drop. We will preview that game in just a second, but first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything, from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Now listen. Paul George just got injured. He injured his knee again. Shocker. The Clippers are in shambles. Do not hit any futures for the Clippers. This is a shameful time to be a Clippers fan. I'm sorry, fellow Clippers fans, which honestly might be one of you. But go Clippers. Either way, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss out on your chance for your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Alrighty, the Arizona Coyotes are in town tonight, an 8:52 puck drop at Rogers Place, basically 9 o'clock. This is going to be a late game. Late game. Get your naps in. If you haven't already, it is going to be a very, again, late game. It feels like the playoffs all over again. Playing Arizona, it feels like the playoffs. But just before we do get into the preview of that game, there is some news around the Edmonton Oilers around transactions and signings. And the Edmonton Oilers have signed a college hockey player. No, it's not Skylar Brindamore. Should still be holding out on that as Quinnipiac is heading into their Sweet 16 game over the week, or actually playing, I believe, on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. So that's starting at least on Thursday. Watch out for that. But the Edmonton Oilers have signed Carl Berglund from UMass Lowell to a 2-year entry-level contract. Now, the contract will start in 2023-2024, but he has signed an amateur tryout deal with the Bakersfield Condors. Basically, we know they're 10 points out of a playoff spot right now. They're not going to make the playoffs. He's going to end the season with Bakersfield, but either way, he's a big boy too. 6'2", 207 pounds. He played in 114 games for UMass Lowell, collecting 89 points in those 114 career games, 36 goals, 53 assists. Now, I was reading Zach Lang's Oilers Nation article, on the signing, and I'm not sure exactly, I forget who the scout was, but they did say that they were shocked that Berglund didn't go in the 2020 draft, ended up going to college, and now signing with the Edmonton Oilers, so a nice little ad there. Again, this is around the time you're going to see a lot more college signings, and of course, watch out for Skylar Brindamore for the Oilers. But let's get into tonight's game for the Edmonton Oilers as the Arizona Coyotes are in town. They did have practice today. Everybody practiced, but Devin Shore was not on the ice. It sounds like the Edmonton Oilers are going to go likely with the 11-7 lineup. So this is what the lines looked like today. Vander Kane on the top line with Connor McDavid and Zach Hyman. Warren Fogle on the second line with Leon Draisaitl and Kyler Yamamoto. Clem Costin was skating alongside Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Matthias Janmark, and those two fourth line-ish, third and a half line, Nick Bukestad and Derek Ryan. The defensive end, a little bit of a change, but not really. Obviously, they are adding, if they do skate 11-7, a defenseman from last game, but Darnell Nurse skating alongside Cody Ceci. Matthias Ekholm with Evan Bouchard, Brett Kulak, and Philip Broberg with Vinny Desharnais skating as the 7th. Stuart Skinner was in the starter's net for the Edmonton Oilers. So, realistically, for the Edmonton Oilers lineup tonight, it is going to be more of a pairings than lines for the Oilers. Basically, a rotation between who's going to play with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Now, there are some conversations with the Arizona Coyotes that sounds like Zach Kassian will not play tonight. Yes, I know. Kassian. Last time the Arizona Coyotes were here, Kassian fought Klim Kostin, kind of the christening of Klim Kostin for the Oilers, kind of the handing of the torch between Kassian and Kostin. But let's talk about this Arizona Coyotes team who is coming off a 2-1 loss against the Winnipeg Jets. But again, we talked about it recently. 6 wins in their last 8 games, points as well in, I believe, 6 of those last 9 games, or 7 of the last 9 games, one of those two numbers, or they're 6, 1, and 2, in their last 9 games. There we go, we got there eventually. But their lines are expected to look like this. Nick Schmaltz is alongside Barrett Hayton and Clayton Keller. That is going to be one line to really watch for the Coyotes tonight. Matias Maccelli, who is going to be my quiet Calder Trophy pick for this year. He has been fantastic. He's going to be a player to watch tonight. He's alongside Jack McBain and Lawson Krause. In the place of Zach Kassian is Milos Kellerman. He is getting into another game for him. He's alongside Travis Boyd and Christian Fischer. Liam O'Brien on the 4th line with Laurent Dauphin and Brett Ritchie, who is traded for his brother Nick at the deadline. Yes, Brett Ritchie from the Calgary Flames. The defensemen look like this as Uso Välimäki is lining up next to former Edmonton Oiler prospect Michael Kesselring. Patrick Nemeth is alongside J.J. Moser and Connor Mackey. Colin Mackey's a different person. Connor Mackey is alongside Victor Soderstrom, the teammate of Philip Broberg, and I believe they were actually defensive partners at the World Juniors in 2020 as well. Connor Ingram, or 2019, I believe. Connor Ingram is the starting goaltender for the Coyotes tonight. As mentioned, Zach Kassian will not play, but it also sounds like there is one looming game time decision for the Arizona Coyotes. Hasn't really been specified what it is, which makes me think it could be a top 6 player like a Keller or a Schmaltz or a Hayton. But if there is a game time decision or a late game time decision, Boko Imama will be the one who comes into the lineup for the Coyotes. This is going to be a big game for the Edmonton Oilers, especially bouncing back from that little shaky game that they had against the San Jose Sharks. This is hopefully a game that they can try and really take advantage of a team that coming off a tough loss against the Winnipeg Jets. They have lost games against contenders like the Colorado Avalanche and the Winnipeg Jets as well, but still 6 wins in the last 8 games, points in 6, 1, and 2 in their last 9 games. Again, not really great at math off the top of my head, but 8 of their last 9 games. There we go. But this is also a team who's been fantastic at home. Now, the Arizona Coyotes did have that really long road trip earlier on in the year, which ended in Edmonton before they head back to Mullet Arena. They have one of the best home records in the Western Conference, which is pretty interesting considering. And this is a team that has been doing everything they possibly can to get points. So could be kind of a catch-22 for the Oilers, but either way, puck drop at 8:52. Yes, 8:52 at Rogers Place tonight. The reason why is because it is, I believe, TNT. It's a doubleheader for TNT, and they're going for a late puck drop, so everybody can tune in for the Arizona Coyotes versus Connor McDavid. Alrighty, let's wrap up today's episode with the Ghost of Oilers Past. And this guy is relatively notorious for not doing one thing. That is another hint. Heading into the Ghost of Oilers past, but first, today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you're hiring, you need Indeed because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can do it all. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March 31st. Alrighty, let's wrap up today's episode with the Ghost of Oilers past. And as hinted earlier today, this guy was drafted by the Edmonton Oilers in 2011. Didn't play for the Edmonton Oilers, was traded initially for a player who never played in the NHL, spent a lot of time in the AHL, then came back in hopes to play with Leon Draisaitl, a few fellow countrymen of his. Didn't work out. In fact, he didn't score a single goal as an Edmonton Oiler. That player? Tobias Rieder. Yes, Tobias Rieder in 67 games as an Edmonton Oilers, 0 goals, 11 assists, 11 points. I remember right after the year he played for the Edmonton Oilers, he came back and scored against the Oilers, and everybody was sitting there going, oh, it's nice you can score, buddy. But he was drafted by the Edmonton Oilers back in 2011. He was the 114th overall pick, 4th round pick in that draft, but he didn't play for the Oilers initially. On March 29th, 2011, the Edmonton Oilers traded Tobias Rieder for Cale Kessie. Yes, Cale Kessie, who didn't play a single game for the Edmonton Oilers, and then he was sent to the Coyotes, where Tobias Rieder actually kind of broke out into the NHL. He spent some time around the Arizona Coyotes, and I believe he stopped by one place before in 2018 on July 1st. He would come back to the Edmonton Oilers, signing a 1-year deal worth $2 million in hopes to sign or play with Leon Draisaitl, and that didn't happen. He ended up playing bottom 6 minutes. He was not more interested. The Oilers wanted him to be more in a grinder role, was not really given much opportunity to do much else, and in 67 games, 0 goals, 11 assists, 11 points. Now, Bob Nicholson actually rather famously got in trouble around Tobias Rieder because he publicly said that he didn't want to sign Tobias Rieder or re-sign Tobias Rieder in the offseason. He later apologized about it, but it was very clear as well. The Edmonton Oilers fans were not really happy with Tobias Rieder as well. It was kind of like the little engine that could. You're like, come on, buddy, you can do it. But especially at that time, the Edmonton Oilers were looking to make the playoffs, and they couldn't afford to basically sit there and go, come on, bud, you can do it. So Tobias Rieder would be, that would be the only season he would play for the Edmonton Oilers, as he would then go to the Calgary Flames. Didn't spend a lot of time there. He would then go to Buffalo the following year, but after spending 2 more seasons in the NHL, he went back to Sweden. Went back to Europe, is now playing in Sweden for the Växjö Lakers. Yes, I did say that right. It's not Vax Joe or Vacho or whatever. It's Vauquois. And he is currently playing in the Swedish Hockey League with Vauquois. Now, not too bad of a player over there for Vauquois as well. 76 games played, 25 goals, 18 assists, 43 points. That is all in 2 seasons. Now, 4 games played for him in this year's playoffs. 1 goal, no assists for him. Again, 1 point. But he did score a goal in game 2 of the series against Luleå in the Swedish Hockey League playoffs. They won 7-2 in that game. They're currently up as well 2-1 in the series. There we go, the word I'm looking for Vauquois and Tobias Reeder. What a weird story he was. I remember him getting drafted, and I was a little excited about him. I knew a little bit about him. I remember watching him in the World Juniors, if I'm not mistaken. He has played for Germany a couple of times, and was a little excited to see him. And then Cale Kessie, that was an awful trade, an awful acquisition. One of those times where the Oilers were just acquiring weird WHLers, too. I remember even preceding that, there was like Mitch Moroz. Well, Moroz was around that time, too, and who else was the other one that the Oilers got too? There was just some weird players. Cameron Abney too. That was an odd one. But Tobias Reeder, your ghost of Oilers past. Let's wrap up today's episode here. Again, the Edmonton Oilers face off against the Arizona Coyotes tonight. 8:30 puck drop, quote unquote, but it will be an 8:52 puck drop at Rogers Place. So cuddle in with your hot cocoa and I don't know, whatever you get at late at night. Let's call it there, everybody. Hopefully at the end of tonight, we can all play La Bamba, baby.